fires in the Amazon. It's almost biblical. And our next guest has got quite a biblical name. Caleb, thanks very much for joining us.
Sure, glad to be here as always.
It's been too long, my friend. I watch you every day on RT America, and so should others. I want to start off, though, with the G7 summit. Now, you'll have to forgive me, but not many people in Britain regard that summit as being of much import. After all, neither Russia nor China are at it, and President Trump seems to be roaming around like a bull in a china shop, alternately patronizing, bullying, and browbeating the other supplicants. Sorry, I mean the other participants. How does it look from your side of the pond?
Well, he set the stage for the G7 summit with the tweet that we, the Americans, saw on Friday morning, in which he said, quote, "Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China." Now, the thing is, when Donald Trump sent this tweet out and basically is, declaring on Twitter that American companies are ordered to stop doing business with China, it's almost like he forgot that we don't have the Chinese economic and political system in the United States. In the USA, we have a free market system where the president doesn't have the ability to hereby order with a tweet who American companies can and cannot do business with. We don't have a command economy. And so there was quite a strange reaction to that tweet, almost mockery, it seemed, to Donald Trump making these bold claims. However, to a lot of Trump's base, that tweet looked pretty good. It looked like he was saying, look, I'm standing up for average working men in the United States, working men and women. I'm saying that you can't ship jobs overseas. So it was a bit of political theater. But it's a little strange to have the president on social media saying, I hereby order things, when he has no constitutional authority to hereby order them.
But he is the king of Israel and the chosen one, so maybe it's gone to his head.
A little bit. You wonder, is this all performance art, or is he's starting to approach a level of delusion? Now, in the setup to the G7, we also heard him lashing out at the French president, Macron. And he was mad about the digital tax. He was threatening possibly a tariff on French wine. But we know what the real disagreement between Trump and Macron really is, and that's the Iran deal, right? That France very much favored the Iran nuclear conclusion, the P5+1 talks, the JCPOA, whereas President Trump is absolutely opposed to it, has ripped it up. That's the real disagreement between Trump and Macron. It's not really an issue of digital taxes and wine tariffs and all of that. A lot of theater there that we heard.
Now, he led, and I think I can say led, I mean, he may have actually, but he certainly metaphorically led the British Prime Minister around by his necktie, almost like an exhibit, like a performing bear. I don't know if you've caught any of these pictures, but nothing could be more humiliating. There's not been anything so humiliating since George W. Bush cried, "Yo, Blair!" and Blair came bounding up to him around the time of the Iraq War. Are a lot of people mentioning that or noticing that, this new strange affair in the special relationship?
Well, Trump refers to Boris Johnson as Britain's Trump, and he very much likes to tote him around like a trophy. It's proof that his presidency has been good, because now someone who he considers to be very similar to himself is now leading the United Kingdom. And I think that he very much considers Boris Johnson's ascendancy to be a confirmation that somehow his presidency in the United States was correct, so correct that the British people have now copied it with their new prime minister. And I think that's how Trump sees it, or at least how he's trying to present it to his supporters and to a domestic audience in the United States. Now, Boris Johnson and Trump are very different people. I mean, despite whatever similarities exist, there certainly are plenty. They have very different political backgrounds.
Well, Johnson can speak Latin and Trump can hardly speak English.
That's one way of putting it. The other thing, though, is that, Trump has announced opening up trade with Japan at the G7, and he's been really playing that up. But it seems like Japan has now just recently followed the lead of Trump, and they've started a trade war of their own, not with China, but with South Korea. They have put sanctions on South Korea, and in response, South Korea is responding. And now we see a mini trade war in the Pacific between Japan and South Korea. So it's almost as if the Japanese leadership has followed the example of Trump and decided to have a trade war of their own. So people are paying close attention to that situation.
But all these trade wars, and I don't know how you keep track of all the countries you've sanctioned or you're in trade wars at various stages with. But there's no doubt that they're driving the world to a new recession, and maybe a very big one.
Well, indeed, Trump has attached himself to Peter Navarro from the White House Trade Council. Peter Navarro and this other guy, Tim Lighthizer, and these guys are anti-China agitators. They're not really taken seriously among mainstream U.S. economists. They have made their whole career going around telling everyone that the cause of all economic woes is China. And they put on, fancy performances, lots of, flashing lights and bells and whistles. And they're good performers, good pitchmen, good salesmen. But they're not really taken seriously. And we've seen, many voices, the Wall Street Journals and others warn that we could be seeing a Peter Navarro recession, that this guy is not a well-respected economist. And he seems to have the ear of the president. And his obsession for decades has just been opposing China, economically fighting against China, doing everything he can to combat China. And Trump seems to be very closely listening to this fellow. And people are wondering, is Trump going to crash our economy because he's got a magical wizard or a Rasputin or an economic flim-flam man whispering in his ears?
It's a very difficult, dangerous time for a president to be risking their economy with the presidential election for a second term coming up. I mean, I was listening the other day to tales of horror from Midwest farmers who are hurting very badly from the sanctions and counter-sanctions now from China. I see that a steel plant in Michigan just laid off 200 workers. So much for putting America back to work again. It's risky for Trump, this, isn't it?
It certainly is. The farmers are almost kind of sacred in Americana, right? We have the writings of Thomas Jefferson, who hailed the yeoman as the great example of the ideal American citizen, this small farmer with his own land. We've got, the left, the right, the farmer is just kind of sacred. And Obama really, did a bad thing to the farmers in the United States when he put sanctions on Russia, right? And that farmers in the United States couldn't export their goods to Russia. And that was supposed to hurt Russia so badly, but now they're having a farming boom in Russia, right? Agricultural boom. The Russian government has been sponsoring the creation, and now all over Russia, they're having the biggest harvest that they've had in decades. And on top of that, so now China, another market where American agribusiness, mainly, not the small romantic farmer that you hear about, but big agribusiness corporations have exported to. Now China is not buying American soybeans. It's not buying American beef. It's not buying American agricultural products. And it's going to be pretty miserable. Now, and you got to keep in mind that a lot of these red states that voted so strongly for Trump are the farm belt of the United States, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska. So this could potentially hurt Trump. Now, that's not to say that people in those states, just because they may not like the results of the trade war and the impact on agriculture, that doesn't necessarily guarantee they're going to vote for the Democrat, right? These are very solid conservative folks, so we can't be really sure this is going to hurt Trump in the final election. But it's not good for a big sector in the U.S. economy, that's for sure.
Now let's switch gears and tell me about the Amazon, the fires in the Amazon, almost biblical scenes, the Earth's lungs on fire. It has swept the world as an issue of alarm, and that is being presided over by Trump's another of his bosom buddies, Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil.
Sure. And I mean, Bolsonaro has come to the United States. He's been, had the red carpet rolled out for him. The two of them, very much like each other. But yet, at the same time, in the United States, even among the mainstream, there's a feeling that Bolsonaro is not a good guy. We see his ties to paramilitary right-wing organizations in Brazil. Furthermore, the only reason Bolsonaro was elected is because Lula da Silva, the socialist, was locked in jail to keep him from running in the election. Lula da Silva was the favored candidate according to every poll, and now we have the tweets and evidence revealed that during the trial, in which resulted in Lula da Silva being locked up, that the judge and the prosecutor were in communication, texting each other about how to make sure that Lula da Silva went to jail. So many people around the world are viewing Bolsonaro's presidency as illegitimate. And now that the Amazon is on fire, and people are looking into illegal logging and people skating the environmental regulations in Brazil, and that having a big impact on what's happening. Fires often happen during this season, but nothing like what we're seeing now. These fires could be seen from space, according to some reports. People are wondering how much longer Bolsonaro really has, right? He came in promising he was going to fix everything up. It was going to be, a free market deregulation. It was, the problem was socialism. The problem is social programs, and he was going to have a free market miracle. Well, we're not seeing a free market miracle. We are seeing a huge fire in the Amazon rainforest. So that raises a lot of questions, I think, in the minds of many people. But Trump seems to like Bolsonaro a lot. I have seen that the government of Evo Morales in Bolivia, the Marxist government there, has stepped up their support, and they are sending helicopters and other forces to try and put out the fire. And nobody talks about the fact that Evo Morales' government in Bolivia had the highest rate of GDP growth of all of South America in 2018, the highest rate of GDP growth. We hear all about Venezuela. We're constantly told in the United States, well, Venezuela is having problems. Then that proves that socialism doesn't work. Well, there's a huge amount of growth taking place in Bolivia right now. They are bringing roads to very remote parts of the country. They have wiped out illiteracy. They're having the highest GDP growth rate in all of South America. That's a success story for socialism, but we don't hear about that in American media.
No, you mentioned Venezuela. I'd almost forgotten it because it was top of the news agenda just, well, a couple of months ago, maybe less. Have the U.S. given up trying to overthrow the government in Venezuela, or have they moved on to Iran? Have they moved on elsewhere?
Well, it seems like they've changed their tactics. They've basically given Venezuela the Cuba treatment. They've basically imposed a full-on embargo. And now that's obviously an act of economic warfare that's going to have very big problems it's going to create for the Venezuelan people. But at the same time, it also is a bit of perhaps a confession of defeat, because if they thought they were on the verge of actually toppling the Venezuelan elected government and removing Maduro and the United Socialist Party, they would want to be more integrated into the country. They'd want to have, their forces and their businesses and their diplomats and others there. So giving Venezuela the full-on Cuban embargo, putting them in the same category as like the Islamic Republic of Iran is, in a way, you could see that as the USA admitting they don't see regime change happening anytime soon, that the United Socialist Party is going to remain in power, and they're just going to now do everything they can to make life difficult for them.
Fantastic tour of the horizon. Thank you very much, Caleb. Caleb Maupin of RT America. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All talk shows.